Well, good morning and welcome to yet another episode of Rethinking Freedom. As usual, I am your host, Aya Fubara Eneli, and I would say thrilled to have this conversation, but it's a really solemn conversation. But anytime I get a chance to discuss topics of this nature with the guest that we have today, it is certainly always insightful, always informative, and always moves me to further action because he just brings so much knowledge with him. So with us today is none other than Adesoji Iginla. Some of you may have remembered watching him in some of our very first episodes here on Rethinking Freedom. He is also the host of Adesoji Speaks Knowledge, where you can access every week on Sundays at 12 p.m. Central Time, African News Review, for those of you who are interested in getting news from outside of the United States, who are interested in viewpoints that are not just the propaganda that we are being plied with at this time. That is a great resource for you. He and I also happen to co-host another program called Women and Resistance that focuses on women of African descent across the African continent and the diaspora, including the United States of America, of course, addressing their lives, their times, their legacy, and ensuring that their history and their impact on the world as we know it is not erased as all too often it is. He's a journalist extraordinaire, in my opinion, a very knowledgeable historian, and is based in the UK. And Adesoji, we welcome you to Rethinking Freedom.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. So today's topic is America First, White Supremacy, I would say in full effect, Trump's global legacy on Africa. You know, during Donald Trump's presidency, and even now as his policies echo into the present, so his initial presidency and now his second term, Africa has found herself caught in the crosshairs of tariffs, aid freezes, immigration bans, military escalations, and of course, dismissive rhetoric. And we will get into all of that. While many Americans, if they're paying attention at all to the news, keep just scrolling because they are unconcerned, unbothered, maybe unaware of the long-term impacts of some of these choices and maybe the reasoning behind it. Africans, on the other hand, are losing jobs, losing their literal lives, losing health care, and in some instances, one may argue losing hope. Although, of course, there's another camp that says, you know what? Maybe this is what we need to begin to understand what John Henry Clark says, which is Africa has no friends, and to begin to work more assiduously, if you will, to build relationships with one another to strengthen our own continent. So there is so much that we can cover. Let's see how much we can get into in just in less than 60 minutes. But let's start with economics. Specifically with Trump's infamous tariff strategy, wrapped in the slogan American First. The administration and the MAGA Republicans and all who are propping up this white supremacist, white nationalist agenda, because that's what it is, has imposed heavy duties on steel, aluminum, and manufactured goods, sometimes as much as high as 50% in tariffs on African exports. In Lesotho, where textiles account for 90% of their manufacturing exports, these tariffs have already resulted in the loss of 12,000 factory jobs, a staggering number in a nation that boasts just 2.2 million people. The government of Lesotho has now declared a sudden state of disaster. Of course, across the continent, we see some other tariffs. South Africa fought against tariffs on steel and citrus, with their exports totaling over $3 billion a year. Kenya lost footwear orders worth $30 million due to tariff upheavals under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Sir, what is it that we need to know and we need to be paying attention to when it comes to Trump's strategy with these tariffs and what he's trying to do and its impact on African lives?
Okay, so ideally, if there is a rhyme and reason as to why those tariffs are put in place, one can plan for them. The fact that half of the time they're just haphazard alone means there is no understanding. I don't even think the man knows why he is putting some of the tariffs in place. I mean, we could just go by his own very actions. The fact that he placed a tariff on an island that only have penguins, one would suggest when you're doing anything, you know what the fallout will be. But on a more serious note, I suppose we should have known that this was going to be the way the government was going to be run. Project 2025, the foreign section, told us immediately where the aid and what the policy of America First was going to be vis-a-vis the external world to the United States. But more specifically here, we're talking about Africa. Africa has been, since the dawn of time, has been on the receiving end of so many egregious economic actions, specifically from the imperial class. But now with the capitalist class more focused in the United States, one would expect that because of the nature of the place, maybe the African continent will benefit. But bringing us closer to home, fairly recently in the 2020, after the 2020 election that brought in Joe Biden, what we had was the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which was a way of the United States trying to bring African countries on side because of, quote unquote, the yellow scare, China, China, China. And the result of that was countries like Lesotho could tap into the entry point. Unfortunately, here is the downside of that same policy. It's not the Africans per se who got the right entry. It was the likes of the Chinese and the Indians who went and built factories in places like Lesotho in order to take advantage of these favorable economic opportunities. Now, the tariffs are imposed, you said 50%, basically just wiping out any kind of economic advantage they could have gained with the arrangement. What you now have is they've upped stakes and left. The people who were not protected by any, trade or union organizations are basically left to fend for themselves. So they're back to square one. So here's the thing. Now you've taken or you've destroyed or you've pulled the rug from out of under these guys who are already struggling. You've made them go back to square one. There is no aid coming in from the United States. Most of these countries are impoverished because of previous economic arrangements.
That's what I was going to ask you. We talk about Africa having so many natural resources and certainly the human resources as well. We know that resources have been extracted from Africa for centuries now. We know that was the impetus for the Scramble for Africa, the Berlin Conference, and so on and so forth. We know that is why we have so many multinational corporations that are based in Africa that are not beholden to Africans or our governments, but simply come in to exploit and to extract. How is it that being such a wealthy continent, if not the wealthiest continent, we are in such an impoverished state?
Well, the great late Walter Rodney, Dr. Walter Rodney, gave us a running commentary of what it is that we're currently experiencing. Sometimes they say when you stand in water, you know why you're there, but how to get out or why you were tossed in the water and the water pool in the first place, you might not exactly. But the case with Africa, when you mentioned the Berlin Conference, was there was two angles to it. One was them seeking your resources. The flip side is what we're currently living through, is that you cannot be allowed to industrialize, because what they cannot allow you to do is compete with them. You have the resources. Imagine if countries that are, that have a comparative economic advantage, let's say in the case of Cote d'Ivoire, who is the largest producer of coffee beans in the world, where to say, okay, we'll set up a factory in a place like Nigeria where they can make Ivorian coffee, and that Ivorian coffee is then pushed out to the world. You're competing with the likes of Nescafe under the umbrella of Procter & Gamble. So they are not going to allow that happen. So coming back to the Berlin Conference, one of the aspects of that thing was, forget about you producing anything. Just give us the raw materials. We'll take it over to Europe or the West, add value to it, or in the case of the 1990s, the East Asia, add value to it and bring it back to you, and you buy. In some cases, they actually rub their nose in it. What do I mean by that? In the case of Kenya, for instance, Kenya has fertile land that can be used to feed its people. But Kenya, in the highlands, which is some of the rich terrain in the world, is used to grow flowers. And I don't mean flowers for you to make bread. I mean flowers for you to profess love to somebody else. And yet, you see in the recent years...
So people are dying of starvation, but they have land, but the land is to provide flowers.
Fresh flowers.
But you can't feed yourself.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean,
you can't eat the roses and the carnations and all of that. Yes.
But you could sell the carnations and the roses to then buy food. Guess where you're buying the food from? You're buying food from Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukraine is embroiled in a war. So a couple of months ago, you had the president of Zimbabwe and the president of Kenya, Mnangagwa for Zimbabwe and William Ruto in Kenya, go to Russia to beg Russia to allow Ukraine to export grains. Can you imagine that level
with all the arable land that we have in Africa? Why are we not having that conversation amongst ourselves?
That would be the rational person's reaction. But these guys don't think rationally. For them,
that's interesting, because the question is why? Because on the one hand, living in America, I can see Americans saying, yeah, it should be America first. Yeah, we should take care of ourselves, and we don't have to play fair. And it's not our fault if some of these other people are willing to kowtow to us as bullies and willing to give up their autonomy for us. We are not under any obligation to look out for the rest of the world.
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, okay, so to understand how all of this plays out, you have to go back to what's it called? The General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Okay. Which brings us back to the issue of tariffs. That General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs is clear. It's that no country can use tariff as a way of keeping trade out. So long before the idea of globalized trade, that was the mechanism, that was the idea that as long as you have comparative economic advantage, you can use that as a way of, well, coming back to Africa, the comparative advantage we had was producing raw materials. And so raw materials we produced. We consume finished goods to our detriment, because what we are doing is the hard-earned currency we get for our primary products.
Whose prices are determined by the buyer.
Exactly.
And then whatever we earn, we then turn around and buy consumer goods that are also determined. By the seller. So we lose both ways.
Both ways. Yeah. Okay. So when the World Trade Organization came in and China entered, what that did was then it skewed the table a lot more in favor of the people who are already winning. So the only time we could get a look in was when there was a spike in the price of our commodity. Say you had a flood in New Orleans in the case of rice, or maybe you had a forest fire in Ukraine. The price of coffee and grains goes up in Africa. So Africa can use, because they also operate what is known as futures, the price you pay now runs for 6 months.
Okay.
And so because if you have a spike in the price of any agricultural product, that runs for 6 months. And so you can plan for that 6 months. But because Mr. Trump is now in there, the tariffs knocks away all that comparative advantage. You're
and,
not
and any ability to plan, which we're seeing impacting American manufacturers and businesses as well, because you just don't know what's coming one way or the other.
To make matters worse, the USAID that used to be the umbrella body that aided the farmers. So the American farmers had a double advantage. Here was the double advantage. They could get subsidies. The rest of the world cannot use subsidies in agriculture, with the exception of Europe, with the Common Agricultural Policy called CAP. But the United States, the United States farmers can get subsidies. That's one. And then not only do they get subsidies, they're also then encouraged to hold back excess production. So one will not find it odd that during the summer months,
so they basically get paid not to produce.
Not to produce, yes.
Even though there is world hunger.
Yes. And here's the thing. What is considered excess in some cases is taken up by the USAID as part of the World Food Program. So they buy it at market value. So whatever you tell me is what your grains is worth is what I pay you for it. There is no fixed price. So they take that excess stock off the table, give it to the World Food Program to hold, to go and give impoverished countries all over the world, but predominantly in Africa. So not only are they also undercutting our farmers who are producing the same stuff
without subsidies, yes.
Without subsidies. Now, here is the problem. Because without subsidies, we can't produce to match them, we're now forced to rely on what it is they produce. Now, once USAID comes off the shelf, i.e., by virtue of Mr. Trump pulling the plug on the USAID, that excess production no longer comes through. We can't even afford to compete with people who need. Can you see how that was a bit of a stable?
So these cuts are causing really
ripple effects in the chain.
Famine in areas where people absolutely do not have access to food they need. I should share this just in terms of statistics on the humanitarian cuts that are taking place. Again, Doge.
Mr. Moss.
The Department of Grifters efficiently stealing from the taxpayers, led by quote unquote the richest man on earth, which is just insane. Who is the greatest welfare recipient of taxpayer dollars in the United States of America? Under their recommendations, and of course, Project 2025, this was in the works all along. They have cut the USAID. There have been many so far-reaching impacts of these cuts. Let me just share some information. There is a program called PEPFAR, which is America's signature HIV/AIDS program in Africa.
Yep.
It has been credited with saving over 25 million lives since its creation. Under Trump, the funding dropped from 7.1 billion in 2019 to 2.9 billion, which is proposed for 2026, and is not guaranteed, because we've seen with this MAGA Republicans, they can earmark a certain amount of funds and still go back and vote to repeal it. We saw that recently with the public funding. UNAID's projects will cause up to 2.9 million excess African deaths. This is the projection. And it will also cause 10.75 million new HIV infections by 2030. Because when you don't have preventative programs in place, when you do not have adequate aid to treat those who are already infected, what you're effectively doing is helping the disease to spread.
Just to mention something.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just to mention something on that country, the AIDS spread. They are currently holding contraceptions.
Yes.
Pills, and other two.
They're actually destroying contraceptives.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah. So to think that they've got, how much was it worth? They said it was about 27 million worth, $27 million worth of contraceptions.
Condoms.
Contraceptives.
Yes.
Yeah.
That were destroyed.
That will be destroyed. Guess how much with? So you're holding 27 million to be destroyed with 700,000 US dollars.
Because it costs money to destroy.
No, but you're destroying 27 million.
Yes.
Dollars worth.
Yes.
Of drugs or contraceptive implements.
Yes.
With $700,000. Why not give it away?
Because the cruelty is the point, and that is why we talked about white supremacy in effect.
Yeah.
Because just the topics we've covered so far, if you impose these tariffs, people lose their jobs. If you cut the aid, there's hunger, widespread hunger and famine. Yep. Children not being able to effectively develop, their brains not effectively develop, perhaps die of starvation. If you add to that, an opportunity for AIDS, HIV to spread, what you're effectively doing is killing off a whole bunch of people, which might just be the plan, because ultimately you want fewer Black and brown people across the world. Now, we're not going to get into details today, but I do encourage our listeners and those of you who watch us on YouTube, which, by the way, please like and share and subscribe and leave a comment. We want to hear your comments. Be respectful, of course. Even if you disagree with what we're sharing, you can do so, agreeably. But we see now, even where Bill Gates and his foundation
in
are trying out a new form. Well, Namibia said no, but other countries are apparently allowing them to try out this new form of so-called contraception that basically is, once you take it or try it, it's 8 years where you cannot have children. And it has not been tried anywhere else to find out what are the long-term effects. They're not trying it here in the United States of America or in any of the Western countries, but they're again choosing Africa to be the guinea pigs. So in South Africa alone, where over 7.5 million people live with HIV, it is projected that the cuts to the USAID and to the HIV/AIDS program in Africa by the Trump administration will result in approximately 500,000 deaths. At the same time, USAID staffing was slashed from over 10,000 employees. So some of you may know people or know people who've lost their jobs. To just 294. That is slashing that agency by over 97%. 83% of field programs were canceled, including malaria, polio, tuberculosis, and maternal health projects. Again, what is the purpose of all of this? And what Trump says in his classic, idiotic, ignorant form is, we are not the world's babysitter. forgetting that just a scant 5 years ago in 2020, the world was brought to its knees by a pandemic that does not care about artificially drawn borders, does not care if you want to, quote unquote, let people in or out. When they had the forest fires waging in Canada, my daughter was in Washington, D.C. coughing, and people were rushing to their doctors with allergies and respiratory problems. Like, these borders, disease, and all of these issues do not care what those borders are. So when you say we're not the world's babysitter, but you don't mind about going to these areas to extract what you need, but at the same time want to hurt the people, and somehow people think with this America First project that it's not going to also affect them here within their borders. I just find it absolutely insane that we lack such basic critical thinking skills. But what do you have to say about that?
So I want to highlight the HIV program, and here is where it gets slightly macabre. When the AIDS scourge happened in predominantly southern area of the continent, and basically the parents were dying off and the grandparents were having to look after the kids and what have you. South Africa at the time, the government of Thabo Mbeki decided, you know what, we can't allow this happen. And so they looked to the pharmaceutical company, and they couldn't afford the drugs. So they said, you know what, let's go to India and get cheaper versions of these drugs, which are readily available. The American pharmaceutical companies sued the United States, the South African government, threatening lawsuits, and, you know, I mean, not threatening lawsuits, actually sue them. But the government in power then, under George Bush, said, you know what, rather let's come to some sort of agreement as to how we move forward. So the agreement was the United States government will pay 60% of the drug price to the American companies, where 40% will come from South Africa. And that has been the reason those drugs have been affordable to the African consumers of said drugs.
Yes.
Now, the drug itself came under the auspices of the USAID. And so with the pulling of the USAID now, you've basically not only removed the drug, but also collapsed the trust in the United States government. Because
keeping its word on anything.
Thank you very much.
Although the Native Americans could have told us that
to make matters,
America's word is not worth the paper it's written on.
So to make matters worse, when we talk about American first and white supremacy in effect, here is where it really gets dark. Majority of the African countries, and including within the United States, there is a thriving, I hate to use the word, there is a thriving aid economy, HAID economy, that basically majority of the money that comes into the continent goes towards administrative costs and paying for drivers, paying for doctors, so essentially what you've done is you've wiped out middle class in certain African countries, because that is now gone.
Yeah, a lot of those non-governmental organizations.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So sometimes when you move the needle like that, when you pull the thread, you're not only pulling one thread, you're actually unraveling an entire fabric.
And is
of
that not the point of Project 2025? To unravel the fabric for Black and Brown people here in
yes,
the United States, but
yes,
also across the world. You know, whether you look
yes.
at what's happening with Mexico or the pressure being put on Brazil, you know, Trump and MAGA Republicans are bullies who want what they want is to quote unquote be on top, whatever that means to them, and for everybody else to bow down and serve their means.
And even on the issue, still on the white supremacy aspect of it, here is how bad it gets. People can Google this thing. There was an interview that a gentleman did with Peter Thiel. Just say Peter Thiel and humanity.
Thiel spelled Thiel.
Yeah.
Who believes that we should have a dictator in place in America,
yes,
by the way. Yes.
And so the question posed to him was, should humanity survive? And this guy, for like 5 minutes, couldn't give us a cogent answer. I mean, to any rational human being, it's like, why would you even ask that question? Instead, the guy was like, in his typical, incoherent self, was rambling.
You know, again, aside to this, this is Rethinking Freedom, and the idea is to think critically about what freedom means and what actions you're going to take. You know, there's this whole question about whether life imitates art or art imitates life. I was on a flight recently coming back from Egypt, ancient Kemet. I don't typically have make a lot of time to watch movies, and perhaps I should, but I don't. But I happened to catch just the beginning part of Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible: The Reckoning, I think it is.
Yeah, the fourth.
And there was this whole conversation about I believe it was called The Entity, which sounded very much like an artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And tech people basically controlling the world and controlling knowledge. And ultimately, the goal of this entity was to destroy humanity. And so when you talk about, they're asking him a very basic question about should human beings survive? Should we be able to thrive? Should everybody be able to work and live a decent life? And you are a human being who has to think about it. What is it that is really driving you? And these are the people who are funding MAGA, funding Project 2025, funding and propping up a man who definitely shows his brain is addled on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And these are the policies that are rolling out with great impact on the lives of so many Black and Brown people.
And here is where it gets truly dangerous.
More dangerous?
Yeah, more dangerous. No. I mean, here's where it gets truly dangerous. While Trump can be allowed to run roughshod over anything, the more dangerous hand is when it is sure that this is what we intend to do. And what do I mean by that? When I brought up the name of Peter Thiel, I did it specifically to highlight the link between him and J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance, the Manchurian Candidate.
Exactly.
Another movie you should go watch.
Yes. J.D. Vance is the president in waiting. And when the president in waiting gets his chance, that movie you were watching of the tech bros, basically your Elon Musk, your Peter Thiel, your David Sachs,
and even Zuckerberg.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, even the guy with the guy who everybody buys stuff from.
Amazon, Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos. All these guys, Microsoft, all these guys control your AI. The one where nobody wants to read anymore, that you want stuff to be read to you. What is going to be?
You want it to think for you. Yes.
Think for you, read for you. Some are even falling in love with it.
I heard. Actually, there's recently been a case, again, you can look this up, where a person was driven to commit suicide by AI and this relationship that they had built and trust or whatever. But let's continue talking about this America First, because there's so many tangents that we can get on. So let's talk about this whole prison dumping, the deportation deals, the ICE raids, the militarization of ICE, where right now it looks like the United States is willing to put in more money into militarizing ICE, where people just show up, no identification. We don't have their identity. They are anybody could, apparently, who has a white supremacist twitch can join and go and play out their deepest, dreams and desires on Black and brown people in wherever they may be. Yeah. But they are spending more money on ICE than even on health care. For Americans, including white Americans who may be voting for this MAGA, with no teeth in their mouth and without access to hospitals in their rural areas and so on and so forth. So what is going on with this prison dumping and this arm twisting of African nations to make deportation deals or face the wrath of the United States of America?
Again, the beauty of how they move is there's usually two angles to it. One is the domestic audience. The domestic audience need their entertainment. Their entertainment is the cruelty they can mete out to people that don't look like them, because they've dehumanized the people that don't look like them to the point where consent has been manufactured. Yes, go ahead, whatever, you understand. But clearly, when MAGA speaks, the projection is a confession in itself. The accusation that certain people have certain nefarious traits or proclivities in the way they move, you can just look at the rank and file of the
MAGA Republicans
and find them there.
The number in his first term, the number of people who were convicted of breaking all kinds of laws, and the fact that he himself is 34 times a convicted felon,
and also
a sexual assaulter. So, and now you are pointing fingers at other people that are not worthy of staying in the country with all of your crimes.
Exactly. So when the idea of
and let's not mention the Epstein files.
No, I mean, that's the elephant in the room. When they say deport everybody, what they're meaning is let's keep this gene pool here, untainted by the scum that is people that don't look like us. We've seen this back in history. You have to create an enemy first, and when the enemy is not that many. So initially, remember, they were saying they were going after hardened criminals. But they realized those hardened criminals were few and far between. So they now extended it to people that don't look like you, so we can pick them up. Now, here is where it gets truly tricky. What about people like J.D. Vance that are married to people that don't look like them? That's one aspect. When they pick up your neighbor, the one that you've lived with for X number of years, and then you find ICE going out, would you step out to, that's how society.
But we understand that that's what happened with the Jewish Holocaust.
Yes.
Which unfortunately now people who are survivors
and then perpetrating the same thing.
Perpetrating a worse genocide, if you will.
So with the prison, with the prisoner dump, there is no rhyme and reason to it. It's to be seen to be doing something, because the distraction is what they need. The distraction is what allowed them to pass the ugly bill. The distraction is what meant while everybody's clamoring for the file, you can take over DC. The distraction is these guys these guys are Colombians, they are Vietnamese, but we can dump them in Sudan, South Sudan, to be specific. The law will be allowed to play out in certain ways, but at the same time, we're still going to push the envelope as much as we can, as long as we are not allowed to focus on the real problem, which is them, the lack of any policy. So coming back to the prisoner thing, it's illegal to just dump anybody anywhere. You can't make anyone stateless. That is according to international law. You can't make anyone stateless. So picking up somebody who is a Colombian simply because Colombia refused to take them from you and then say you're going to give them to a third country is illegal.
But here's the issue with when we talk about what's legal and what's illegal. First of all, of course, we know these are laws that are largely made by white men. But second of all, the law has no teeth if there is not a body to enforce it. So what we're seeing on the international landscape is, yes, you have the International Court of Justice, you have all of these so-called laws or policies that all countries are supposed to adhere to. But if the arm of the UN or any of these other foreign entities that enforces those laws is largely controlled by the United States or largely controlled by any other imperialists, then we can, if I'm the one who gets to enforce a law and without me, you can't enforce it, I can violate it all day because, like we would say in the streets, who gonna check me, boo?
Yeah, yes, you can. But here's the beauty of what you've just said now. The pretense was that we had laws.
The pretense. And we were lulled to sleep thinking that there were some rules that we were all going to be abiding by.
But it's two-sided though. The pretense was we had laws. The pretense was from time to time we adhered to said laws. But when nobody believes in said laws,
it's going to be chaos for the whole world.
It's going to be chaos for the whole world. But here's the thing. The title, American First, White Supremacy. Supreme in what?
Supreme in cruelty.
Yeah, supreme in cruelty. But up to a point, that's if we allow ourselves to be under the jackboot. Because if no one wants to,
because ultimately, if I don't have to abide by laws and you decide I'm not abiding by laws anymore, then it's free for all. It's chaos. And you may sometimes come out on top because you have superior weapons, but that's not always guaranteed. Vietnam is an example.
Yes.
Carry on.
So the shocking thing is there used to be a case where when the United States coughed, the whole world catches a cold. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, because you have a behemoth on the other side of the world, if the world looks the other way, which is what the world is going to do when BRICS comes into play, you can already see the United States throwing their toys out of the pram, that anybody that takes on any currency other than the United States will be sanctioned. The United States dollar will be sanctioned. Here is where that white supremacy becomes shredded. The moment people say, no, we're no longer playing with you, you can't force us to play with you. But the unfortunately thing is people that look like you and I are in the United States and we bear the brunt of it. That's the sad part. And so when wiser heads have written books on the solidarity between African Americans and people on the continent, but for some reason, the rise of social media has sort of created a wedge where we are now arguing over who's got what over what. All the nonsensities of the world is our own preoccupation. instead of building solidarities that were started in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, but now largely fragmented in the 2020s. So what's the solution? Like you say, we need to rethink freedom. There needs to be engagement like you and I are having now. We're speaking across borders, we're speaking cross wires. You're in the United States, I'm in the UK. Only last week, people were willing to, and when I say people, old people came out en masse to be arrested. 83-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 60-year-olds came out in droves. And when I say droves,
and this was in the UK, and basically we're like, yeah, go ahead and arrest us. Yes.
So exactly. So they prescribe, the people pushed against a prescription of Palestine Action, which is a group in favor of, who does direct action with regards to issue of Palestine. And the government quickly proscribed the organization, wherein jurists were telling them that this is a very bad idea. You cannot do that. But the government went ahead and did it anyway. So a group organized a protest and called for volunteers to be arrested. They asked for 100, 500 turned up. Next week, they're asking for 1,000. They've already had 2,000 people sign up.
Wow.
That is what you call solidarity.
How many of us are you going to imprison?
Exactly.
So I'm looking at the clock, and there's so much that we can discuss, so much that we still need to at least touch on. Yeah. So, I know I'm based in Texas. Texas happens to be the place where I think
you're about to be gerrymandered.
Yeah, of course, we're dealing with the racial gerrymandering right now. And you have people who are really buying into the propaganda. But, Texas is like Texas and Florida are like the testing grounds for the most, I would say, cruel and hurtful policies against women, against Black and brown people, and against the LGBTQIA community. They test them in these states, and then they mass, wholesale sell it to other parts of the country. And so I know that there are people here who are going to be listening locally who are going to say, well, but if it's benefiting America, if the factories, the tariffs are benefiting America, what do we care? And I think it's important for people to note that although Lesotho has now lost 90% of its manufacturing and lost a significant number of jobs that are drastically impacting people. By the way, when you talk about immigration bans and you're not wanting people to come into your countries, most people do not leave their countries because they hate their countries. It's literally
because of that very reason.
Basic necessity. So people did not leave New Orleans because they hated New Orleans. But when the Katrina flood occurred,
you had to go to places like
Houston. And there were no resources. People had to fan out and endure a lot of uncertainty to go to places where they hoped they could rebuild.
Yeah.
So when you devastate countries, then you turn around and wonder why there are more refugees and more people trying to come to the countries that you're selling as the areas that have land and milk and honey and gold just in abundance. You're actually creating the very circumstances that you want to avoid. But what has happened, though, is although you've now impacted Lesotho and some other areas, what the international brands have done is not bring back manufacturing to the United States. They've not created more jobs in the United States. They're actually very scared of the uncertainty here. All they've done is shifted their manufacturing to places like Bangladesh and Vietnam. Those jobs still have not come back to America. So what exactly have you accomplished except, yes, destabilize more nations, but also increase the cost of your own goods, the goods that you purchase in your own country? But in the meantime, there are African lives that have been impacted that have been decimated. So I wanted to very quickly touch upon, we've got about 10 minutes left here, touch upon the Congo, DRC, looking at minerals, security, sanctions, what role Trump's MAGA white supremacy policy is playing in terms of security and in terms of even the extraction of other minerals from Africa. Do you want to touch upon that a little bit?
Okay, so with regards to Congo, it's got nothing to do with white supremacy. It's got nothing to do with American first. This is a purely transactional basis. Your Mr. Trump wants a bit of the pie. Unfortunately, the circumstances on the ground means he will get his way, because you have Rwanda, who basically have been pillaging some of the most economically resource-rich areas of the Eastern Congo. It's not just Rwanda, Uganda too is at it. So those two have basically been fomenting trouble in Eastern Congo under the masquerading militia called M23, which is essentially a an arm of the Rwandan army, because they're well equipped and well trained and what have you. They're actually holding territory. Militias don't.
And before you gloss over that, and who is arming Rwanda and helping with their training and giving all the ammunition? Like, yeah, let's keep tracing it all the way back.
Yeah, so that would be the United States, where So, I mean, so that in that arrangement there is basically a transactional one. There is nothing ideological about it. There is nothing. So American first does not come into that. This is a purely business proposition. It's like the mafia moving in. We're gonna protect you so that that guy does not bully us. It does not bully you. And while he does that, we're gonna take this. Are you okay with it? Yes. The foreign ministers have signed an agreement. Sooner or later, the president, Tshisekedi, and what's his name? Paul Kagame are going to come to Washington, D.C. To militarize Washington, D.C. is going to look familiar to them, because they're going to see brown shirts in the streets, and they're going to come and sign their part of the deal, while Mr. Trump gets to cut out the cake, take a big slice, and give them crumbs. So are we going to move away from the trouble spots? In the interim, yes, we might. In the long term, if Mr. Trump leaves, it's going to be business as usual, because as long as the structural basis for the problems are not looked at, we're going to keep going back to the status quo.
Immigration bans, real quickly. What do you think that's accomplishing, particularly bans on Muslim and African countries, supposedly for national security reasons, although the country that had the highest number of terrorists in the 9/11 terroristic attack has no tariffs, I think, imposed on it, and certainly no immigration bans. But how do you see this playing out, particularly while we are also laying out the red carpet for so-called white Afrikaners who are seeking asylum?
I think the issue of immigration bans is an unworkable idea in a globalized economy. One of the problems that kicked off when that idea was mooted was the HB1 visas that you give to the tech guys from India, from all over the world, really. As long as there is a need for specific jobs to be done that cannot be furnished by the United States citizens, you're going to need to bring people in. If they need to be physically there, you're going to need to bring people in. One quick thing about the immigration ban is that history has a funny way of coming back to bite people in the bum. When the United States was destabilizing South America in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and people can read up on the United Fruit Company, specifically that company, just the United Fruit Company.
Yes.
Where do you think, when a company like that owns some of the most lushful agrarian land in a place where people are largely peasants and they cannot farm their own land, where do you think they are going to go? That's just a question to, So, well, I mean,
So
it's
you're creating the very situation that you claim you don't want to have.
exactly.
Okay, I'm going to move you along here just because, again, we're down to the wire here. I do think, as you said, when America realizes it needs the people, at which they're starting to realize, whether it's for agricultural purposes, we need people to farm, we need people to harvest, whether it's for construction purposes. And of course, now I think Trump is kind of like planning some kind of slavery plantation thing where, okay, you can have the illegals, quote unquote, like a human being should be ever considered illegal, working for you, but then you're responsible for them. I guess they live on your land and whatever. But what we know in America is that Nigeria produces the highest number of Black doctors and engineers in this country.
Okay.
As I was driving through the Midwest earlier this year, I was noting the billboards, and so many of the billboards had physicians who had Indian names, who had Hispanic names, who had African names. And I'm like, when you guys make it untenable for so many people, Black and brown people, to stay in this country, which is what you think you want, who in the world is going to provide your health care for you? But I just wanted to touch up on that very quickly. But then we see the carpet being laid out for white Afrikaners who are supposedly, being persecuted where they are. So in the 4 minutes we have left, what are your final comments that you want to share with our guests on this notion of America first, what they should be thinking about regarding white supremacy and how it will come back to bite them in the bum, and perhaps what Africans should be doing ourselves so that we are not always so subject to the whims and desires of foreign countries and foreigners and people who don't care anything about us.
Okay, so first on the American situation. Unfortunately, the United States is far gone. What they're trying to do is a lost cause. I mean, they might as well just call it a lost cause. And why do I say that? The country has significantly changed to the point where you cannot reverse that change. You can slow it down, but that change is going to happen. You're not going to be majority white. You can stop all the abortions you want in the world. It's not going to happen. So that one is first. Two is on the issue of Africans. There was a post I saw on social media yesterday, and it struck me as odd. Black people the world over have a way of creating certain things that everybody else copies.
Yes.
So it shocks me that I saw this post and this person was saying, if you want to write like the classic writers, and this person was talking about the Aristotle's, Plato, Socrates, I basically just went there, I'm like, I could give you 50 writers that are in their own unique way legends. Not that they would ascribe such to themselves, but they didn't copy anyone. They came with their own style. And if you copy someone, you're an imitation. You're a cheap imitation. So what do I mean by that in the grand scheme of things? You don't need to copy anyone. You just need to go back to what you previously did. You're going to have to do some remembering. Remember what it used to be like before you entered into this kind of arrangement. And you'll be fine.
Yeah, so I definitely will always be on the side of Africans figuring out how to be independent. And while I will push against these very racist policies that are taking place under this administration, although we know that all of America's administrations to some extent have that racism running through their policies, that I would encourage us as Black people, wherever we are in the world, but certainly those on the African continent, to take this as a challenge, if you will, to not put ourselves at such risk, not to have all our eggs in one basket, as they say, where we become so vulnerable to people who are our common enemies. Any last thoughts in the last 15 seconds here, sir?
It's not American first. It's America part of the world community. Anything that claims wants to be the first obviously doesn't know how the world works. You work in tandem with everyone. You cannot be a first at anything. I'm sorry.
There you have it. Well, thank you all for joining us. Please like and subscribe and share, and we will see you next week when we have yet another stimulating conversation on rethinking freedom. Thank you so much, Adesoji, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.